Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Colonico. I'm the president of the Stockton Chorale, and I would like to introduce my guest on this video cast, Daniel Hughes. Daniel Hughes is a conductor, composer, pianist, voice teacher. He's a jack of many trades. And Daniel is also our guest composer. We commissioned a new work with Daniel called The Singing Bowl. We'll be talking quite a bit about that during this interview. But that's a little bit of the background from my perspective. So I'd like to introduce Daniel to everyone. Daniel, tell us a little bit about your background and your experience in music.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's good to be here and talk about music, because I could talk about music 24 hours a day. So my background, I started piano when I was 4. And it's a very interesting story of how I began. I had strep throat, and I'm going to completely date myself in the story. So when any of the kids in the household, I'm one of 4 children, when any of us were sick, we were allowed to sleep in the waterbed. My parents had a waterbed, so that immediately dates this to the 70s. Because the waterbed was comfortable and you could regulate the temperature, so if you had chills and things like that. And my parents had a hi-fi system in the master bedroom. It wasn't even a regular stereo system, it's a hi-fi. And my mother had a collection that she had gotten just 2 years prior. In 1970, Deutsche Grammophon, the wonderful record label, released a multi-volume set of Beethoven's works. It was called the Beethoven Bicentennial Collection, and she put on one of the albums from the Music for the Piano volume, because I think there's 12 volumes, and every volume has 6 records in it, and so that's 12 sides times 12 volumes. And instead of relaxing me, I actually totally remember what it was. It was the 6 Bagatelles, Opus 126 by Beethoven, amazing pieces. Instead of relaxing me, it actually got me really excited. I was like, what is this? And I said, I want to learn how to play piano. I want to learn how to do this. Well, as it happens, the timing was perfect, because my father had a coworker whose family had an upright piano, and they were going to be out of the country for an extended amount of time. I never got clarity as to why, but we babysat their piano for a year. So all of us started studying piano, and I was the only one who ended up really sticking with it. And so I started. Strep throat led to me learning how to play the piano. And then when I was about 8, I started messing around and composing. My mother used to call it decomposing, because I would do that instead of practicing, and she stopped decomposing and practice. And but yeah, so I was about 4 years old when I started piano, about 8 when I started composing, and I just stuck with it. And I got into vocal music in high school and college, and that led me into wanting to become a conductor. And so I've kept it all going, and it's fueled every aspect of my existence thus far.
And all started with about a strep throat.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you were doing your decomposing, as your mother called it, did you do instrumental decomposing? Did you add lyrics to it, or what?
So originally, when I would write, it was just at the piano. I would get ideas at the piano, and I would just sort of improvise them, and they would coalesce into something more concrete. And so I got a tape recorder. My parents got me a tape recorder fairly early on, because I wasn't writing anything down at the time. I was just memorizing it. And so I would hit record anytime some ideas started to come, and I would just have tons of cassettes. I've lost a lot of them now, but at the time I had tons of cassettes of just me kind of going into these Zen states where ideas would come out, and I'd clarify it and coalesce it and put it into something that had structure. I didn't start doing any choral or vocal composition until my first year out of high school, really. It was all, well, I take that back. I did write a duet for my high school graduation that I sang and played with another high school student because they audition people when you're going to graduate, and so and actually I look back at it and go, I wish I had done something with that, because it's a very commercial sounding piece, and I think it would have really sold as I compare it to other things that are like it that's sold. But my first real classical vocal piece I wrote in 1988. It was an art song called "So We'll Go No More a Roving," set to the poem by Lord Byron, and that has since been also set for choir and is published, and I'm very proud of it. I expanded that art song into a song cycle, 3 songs called Songs of Parting. So it's 3 different poems all about different aspects of people who leave, either relationships end or it's death or something like that. And then as I was getting really involved in the choral program at San Jose State, and it was an extraordinary time. The choral program was huge, and Charlene Archibek, this sort of giant in the conducting world, I really dug into choral writing. And now the majority of the music that I've written at this point in my life is choral music, even though I'm still writing other things.
So tell us a little bit about that process. How does one create a choral composition?
Well, so if you're doing anything vocal, the jumping off point is always the text. It's always going to be the poem. And so for me, it depends on whether or not I've been commissioned to write something, or whether I'm just writing something because I've been inspired to write something. So if it's just for myself, like if there's a poem that comes across my eyes and I'm moved by it, I'm like, I really want to set this. I want to set this to music. I think this is powerful. Then I will. There's a couple of things I'll do. I'll read the poem over and over. I'll say it out loud. I'll see if are there colors in the poem through the language. Is there a rhythm in the poem that automatically starts to dictate some information to me? But also I keep a little notebook. Actually, it's right here on my desk, a little notebook, as well as voice memos on my phone of ideas that just may pop into my head. I actually got this idea from Aaron Copland. He had a wonderful book that I read when I was in junior high school called What to Listen For in Music. And he talks about how he would just keep a little notebook with him all the time. And when some sort of a motive or melodic or rhythmic idea would pop into his head, he would just jot it down. So then when he would, when it was time for him to go write, he would often go to the notebook and see if there are ideas that would come back. So when the poem is motivating me to do something, I'll go and I'll look at my notes or listen to the voice memos and see, oh, okay, there's something here that could work, or I could take this and adapt it. But if it's something that's commissioned, then there are further limitations that are put in place, because the ability level of the group, is it a mixed chorus? Is it a treble choir? Is it tenors and basses? Is this a choir that specializes in world music? Do they do early music? Are they really avant-garde? All of those things create parameters around which the composition has to live inside of those parameters. So, and sometimes that can actually make it easier. I mean, they say with composing, the more you delimit, the easier it is to write the piece. So it's one of the reasons why fugues actually are a pretty neat form to play with, because the rules of writing a fugue are so specific that it's, it has to follow these very narrow steps. And so I find like writing a fugue is actually pretty easy as a result. If there's too much openness, too many possibilities, my brain can't actually filter through, and I actually can have a block, as it were. So that's sort of kind of what I go through. If I'm doing something that's just instrumental, it's then I don't have to worry about a text, because also when you're writing for voice, the other limitations are what can the voices do? What is the voice able to do in terms of range and tessitura? And of course, with avant-garde and extended vocal techniques, there are things that you can, some really unusual things that you can do with the voice. But even then, it still has its limitations. It can only go so high or so low and be so loud or be so soft. Whereas instruments tend to have more breadth. The ranges are wider. And then you don't have to also worry about the delivery system for the text that you would with singing, because for me, I think it's really important that there's clarity in the text, because the whole reason why you're setting a text is that you're trying to augment the message that inspired you to write it in the first place. Whereas if you're just writing for guitar or piano or strings or something like that, you don't have to worry about that. You can just let it, it's just purely a sonic experience, if that makes sense.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the singing bowl, the piece that
Okay.
that you wrote for the Stockton Chorale, commemorating our 70th anniversary season, which is this year. The piece, the Singing Bowl, will have its Stockton premiere on May 22nd. So talk a little bit about that. How did the Singing Bowl come about?
So I found the poem. I had heard that the Kingsingers did this composition contest, which I was late getting on board, so I sort of missed it. But I saw it was a very interesting competition that they did. There were 4 categories in which people could apply. One of them I wouldn't have qualified for because it was composers under 18. But they had 5 poems that the composers could choose from for any of these categories. And one of the poems was the Singing Bowl. I saw it on their website and I went, this is a really wonderful bowl. I mean, a poem. So sorry, a wonderful poem. So then I went and I reached out to the poet and I said, I know that you'd given them permission to do this for this competition, but I would love to set this. Do I have permission to set this? And it's the poem is by a reverend who also is a doctor and who does a lot of folk singing and poetry as part of his ministry. It's a very interesting fellow. Malcolm Guite, I think his name is pronounced. It's Guyte is the way his last name is spelled. Friendly fellow that I talked to on Facebook, and he said, sure, you have permission to do this. And I was very moved by the idea that the idea of a singing bowl has this sort of transcendent sonic experience that puts you in a state outside of yourself. But in his poem, he sort of suggests that we as human beings are our own singing bowl vessel, and we can create that experience with ourselves through singing. And then the way I set the poem too, with the begin the song exactly where you are, as he has it is in the poem, this idea of it being circular. You start in one place because when you do a singing bowl, you play the rim of it with a mallet, and so you go back to the beginning, and so the poem ends where it started, and the song ends with the same musical material as it started. So I thought this would be really great for the Stockton Chorale, so I was working it out, and then as I was about 2/3 of the way sort of finishing it, my group, the Choral Project, always does a combined concert with the local professional chamber orchestra, the San Jose Chamber Orchestra, and we needed something like that for our program. And I went, well, do you mind if I just recycle this thing that I'm doing for Stockton? And Barbara Day Turner said, I think it's great. So it was really easy because all I had to do is just take it from string quintet to just string orchestra. And so it adapted really well. So I got a chance to actually do kind of a trial run with it. And I was really happy with the results. It was fun.
So when you're really happy with a result like that, does that then lead to other inspirations about other potential works that you might compose, or are the compositions themselves kind of like the Singing Bowl? They sort of begin and they end, and they're their own unit, and you move on to something else?
Well, it depends. Sometimes it's its own thing, like you finish it and that's it. But sometimes an idea begets another idea. So, or or an idea that I was trying to use in a composition, I find during the process, this isn't working. It's like I'm trying to force a square peg in a round hole. This idea isn't the right thing for this, but I set it aside and find that, oh, I could use this for this other thing. And then every now and then there's material that I reuse in another fashion. So I'll give you an example of that. About 12 years ago, it doesn't seem like that long ago, I had lost my best friend very unexpectedly. He from a botched routine medical procedure, and he and I used to have, actually, it's this guy right here. He and I used to have. He was also a musician, and he was very much into metaphysics, and we'd have these long conversations about metaphysics and music. And one of the interesting things we used to talk about was how, and I may have mentioned this to you before, how you can measure light as a particle or a wave. And when you measure it as a wave, you can actually record it in the same way that you can record sound waves. So this idea of us being, I'm trying to find the right way to articulate it. When we lose a person and their existence, becomes part of the cosmos with light and matter, when we sing, we can sort of invite them to relive again in a vibrational form as a being of light, because light can function as a sound wave. I mean, as a wave in the same way that sound is. I'm not articulating this as clearly as I normally do. And we used to also talk about overtones, the overtone series, and how when you really tune a chord and it locks and the overtones sort of ring in, it's as if you're inviting sort of unseen celestial singers to sing with you. There are these voices that are singing. It seems like, these sort of divine voices that are singing with you. So I wrote this piece called Invisible Voices that was in a poem, and set it for strings, choir, and handbells. That is very much around this idea. And the main theme of it, do 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 do, so sort of the main thematic idea of it, I've now reused in a piece that I'm premiering this month with the Choral Project, that's set to the "Do Not Stand at My Grave and Weep" poem that you often will see at memorials. I've entitled the piece "Do Not Weep, Do Not Cry." It's attributed to Elizabeth Fry, but it isn't actually really written by her. Nobody really knows who wrote the poem. But because that is about a person who's died, but telling the listener, I'm still here, I actually have recycled the Invisible Voices theme as a counter melody and an accompaniment figure in the piece, because it's the same sort of symbology. So the thematic idea of it, the symbol of that theme applies again. So sometimes I'll reuse material in that way because it has such significance to me in terms of what it represents, that figure will always mean this to me. And so if I find another place to put it, I put it there. So I again, I can wax poetic about this, or prosaic at least about it, and just keep going on and on. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. I have. This is not a skill or an inspiration that exists in my DNA. And I often ask my brother and my stepson, who are gifted musicians of saxophone and guitar respectively, about how they improvise, how they create something. And I asked them, do you hear the music ahead of time? Do you, and it's a combination of things. So I think you articulated how, sometimes a figure doesn't work in one piece, but it works someplace else, or you can use something and you can use a melody in another way in another piece to try to connect it. I think that one of the things that really struck me in what you just talked about was that choral composition is taking the literature and the music and trying to blend these two, what appear to be different art forms together, that are greater than either one of them could be by themselves. I think that I mean, I have had the benefit of being able to sing a couple of your compositions, and I remember after each one, I turn around and say, God, these fit so well in our voices, and we sound so good when we sing it. And I think that part of what your talent is being able to do, as you said earlier, you got to know the group, and you can't do a whole bunch of avant-garde music for a community choir, and you can't do a community choir piece for an avant-garde group, but that's part of, I think that's part of the magic of the whole process, is that there are, it's like a Rubik's cube. You've got all these different possibilities that you're trying to line up, and I think I enjoy listening to it. There's no way in God's green earth I could ever attempt it. So I want to thank you for that. So if somebody wanted to contact you to do an original work, to do a composition, how would they do that?
Well, normally I would say they can go to my website, but it's not. It's being completely rebuilt right now, so I'm not contactable there.
Oh, okay.
So I would say they can contact me directly. My email is maestrohughes@me.com, or they can reach me through the Choral Project's website. So if they just go to choralproject.org and go to contact, they'll find me there until my website is rebuilt. Yeah.
All right. So what's your least favorite aspect of composing music? What drives you nuts? What keeps you up at night?
I would say that it's the same for anybody who is creating something from nothing. It's when you have a block, when you get stuck, you feel like you can't find the solution through something. Yeah, it's very much that. I mean, I'm always writing something. So even if I haven't been commissioned, I find that I'm writing. So right now I'm writing sort of a humanist requiem where all of the texts are not liturgical, they're all poetic.
Oh.
And I don't have anything on there's no one set up on the horizon to perform this piece. I'm just doing it because I'm inspired to do it. But even then with that, I'll get sort of painted into a corner and go, oh shoot, I took this idea in the wrong direction, or I don't know how to get myself around that. That's not quite right. And then I wonder, do I need to scratch and start over, which can sometimes be just exhausting to think about. So it's that sort of stuck where the flow stops flowing. Mm-hmm. I think that's my least favorite aspect of being a composer.
And what's your favorite aspect of being a composer?
I think the thing that I find the most fulfilling is when, I mean, it's satisfying when the piece is done, but there's a wonderful sense of arrival when the piece you've done is performed. You get to hear it performed. And I find it really powerful when the piece is being performed by a group that I'm not conducting, because if I'm writing for my own group, then I'm rehearsing it. So it's very satisfying, don't get me wrong, but I'm still very close to the process. I'm in the middle of it the entire time. So the catharsis at the end isn't the same as when I write it for somebody else and then I just show up at the concert and then I see it sort of bloomed. Like I haven't watched the plant grow after the seed's been planted. I don't watch it bloom. I just go and suddenly, oh, there's all the fruit. And that's powerful. So I love that.
Well, that's great. Well, we are really looking forward to performing the Singing Bowl on May 22nd. The concert will be at Atherton Auditorium on the San Joaquin Delta College campus. That's a Sunday afternoon at 3:30. You can go to the Stockton Chorale's website, www.stocktonchorale.org, for ticket information. Tickets are also going to be available at the door. Daniel will be one of our guests at that concert, and you will get a chance to hear the Singing Bowl come to life in Stockton on that day. So Daniel, once again, thanks for taking the time today to talk with us. I hope that this information that we're going to send out as a video or as a podcast will certainly help with getting our audience energized about coming to listen to this piece of music. The whole theme of our 70th anniversary concert is celebrating music, and we've got some wonderful pieces, and the Singing Bowl, I think, is the premier piece that we will be doing on May 22nd. So thanks again, Daniel. I appreciate your time today, and we look forward to, well, I know I'll be seeing you on May 22nd, and we hope to see all of you out there on May 22nd as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.